Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Arbitrary 20. The open beta for Critical Role's new Daggerheart RPG just dropped. We just did our first impressions. If you want to check it out, I'll leave it up in the card. This was going to be a top 5, but it was getting a little long, so I decided to make it a top 3, and if it does well, we can do another one in the future. And I'm calling them starter builds because they're only going to go to level 4, but even if you are going to go to those higher levels, it should be able to get you going and give you some direction as well. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with the first build. It's going to be a Ridgeborn Orc Guardian. So at level 1, as the name suggests, we're going to be the Orc Ancestry and the Ridgeborn community. We're taking the Orc Ancestry so we can have that 1/3 chance to not consume an armor slot when we use our armor to reduce damage, and the Ridgeborn gives us a +1 to our armor score. I think Ridgeborn and one other that I'm going to use later definitely stand out as the strongest community options. And then for our class, we're going to be going with Guardian, and our subclass is going to be Stalwart. This raises all of our damage thresholds and allows us to spend hope instead of armor slots when we're trying to reduce damage. And then for our traits, I think the only thing that really matters for this build is taking the +2 to strength. For the 2 +1s, you can pick whichever traits you'd like. And for our starting equipment, we're going to want a mace, a round shield, and then you can take whatever armor you want and sell it for another handful of gold or give it to a friend. We're not really going to need armor on this build. And speaking of, for our domain cards, the first one we're going to be going with is Bare Bones. This is essentially the unarmored defense of Daggerheart. I like this and the round shield best because it gives us good armor without subtracting from our evasion. Our armor score will be pretty high, but we do have to spend armor slots or hope to use it. For that reason, I don't think it's worth lowering our evasion score and thus getting hit more to make our armor score higher. And then for our second domain card, we're going to pick up I Am Your Shield. This lets you mark a stress to take damage for one of your allies. And then moving on to level 2, we'll get our 2 level up options, and I would just increase your major and minor damage thresholds. On a build that's trying to get hit and soak up a lot of damage, I think this is going to give us the most mileage compared to other defensive options. And then for our domain card at level 2, we're going to go with Soldier's Bond. This gives 3 hope to you and an ally that you complement. I think this card has really cool flavor that will make some great moments during your campaign, and it's very powerful since we can use hope instead of armor slots. And then moving on to level 3, we'll again get 2 level up options. We're going to be taking a +1 to evasion and getting an extra hit point slot. And then for our domain card at level 3, we're going to pick up Scramble. This lets you completely avoid damage from an attack. Ideally, you use this with a severe damage attack and prevent yourself from losing 3 hit points. And then moving on to level 4, as usual, we'll get 2 level up options. We're going to go with increased traits. We're going to boost our strength, and then whatever else you'd like. With the Bare Bones card, this will increase our armor as well. And then we'll take an additional stress slot. And then for our domain card, we're going to go with Fortified Armor. This increases our armor score by 2, and you can use an armor slot without marking it once per short rest. And our second build is going to be a Firbolg Primal Sorcerer. So for level 1, starting with our Ancestry and Community, as the title of the build suggests, we're going to be going Firbolg. Our subclass ability is going to require us to mark stress. With this, we'll be able to mitigate some of that. And then for our community, we're going to be taking Seaborn, which lets us take an additional downtime action. Like I mentioned in our first impressions video, I'm not a huge fan of once per session abilities because how good they are can vary quite a bit. But if you are taking at least a short rest every session, you'll probably get a lot of good use out of this. And then for the class, once again, like the name suggests, we're going to be going Sorcerer, and for our subclass, we're going to be taking the Primal Origin. This allows us to take stress to modify our spells in different ways. I think the best one is likely going to be targeting an additional creature with a spell. For our traits, I think the only one that really matters for this build is taking a +2 to Instinct. For the 2 +1s and the -1, you can pick whichever traits you'd like. For our starting equipment, we're going to take a dual staff and a quarterstaff for close and far range, and then we're going to take a breastplate for our armor. And then for our first 2 domain cards, we're going to be going with Unleash Chaos. This one is going to be your big blast spell that you get once for free every session, and then you can refill it by taking stress. And then for our second card, we're going to go with Rune Ward. This is a really nice defensive spell that gives us an item that we can keep ourselves or give to an ally, and it lets the one holding it subtract a d8 from damage, but once it rolls an 8, it can't be used again until you rest. And then moving on to level 2, we'll get our 2 level up options. First, we're going to take increased traits, mainly to boost our instinct. For the second one, you can take whatever else you'd like. Most of the things we do are based off our spellcasting abilities, so we'll want to increase it as much as we can. And then for the second one, we'll take an additional stress slot. This will give us more uses of our abilities and let us take a bit more damage. And then for our domain card, we're going to be going with Midnight Spirit. It's not a bad damage option, especially for its range, but the utility of being able to summon a spirit that can help you carry things or scout ahead will be really good as well. And then moving on to level 3, we'll get our 2 level up options. We're going to increase proficiency and then take a +1 to evasion. And then for our domain card, we're going to take counterspell. Fairly self-explanatory, counters a spell or magical effect, but I do find the wording of this counterspell interesting compared to other games. It's not limited use, so you can do it as much as you want as far as I can tell, and the GM tells you how many stress you can take to counter it. So if it's too high or you don't think it's worth it, you can just not go through with it and not take any stress. And then on to level 4. For our 2 level up options, we'll be taking an additional hit point slot and increasing our major damage threshold. And then for our last domain card, I would go with either Blink Out or Flight. Both are great movement options. Pick whichever one you like better or you think would work better in your campaign. And then our last build is going to be a giant whirlwind warrior. I think this is probably my favorite one of the 3. Daggerheart actually seems to have some pretty cool abilities for their martial classes. So starting off at level 1, as the title suggests, we're going to be going with Giant. This gives us an additional hit point slot and, more importantly, increases our melee range to very close. For our community, we're once again going to be going with Ridgeborn, taking that +1 to our armor score. For the class, we're going to be going with Warrior, with the subclass being Call of the Slayer. For the traits, the most important one for this build is going to be that +2 to agility. For the 2 +1s and the -1, you can take whichever traits you'd like, but you may want to consider putting one of the +1s into knowledge for a feature you could take later on. For our starting equipment, we're going to be taking 2 short swords, 1 primary and 1 secondary, and then for our armor, we're going to be going with a breastplate. And then for our starting domain cards, first we're going to pick up Whirlwind. We can spend Hope after we hit with a melee attack to hit all other creatures within range at half damage. This will be the build's main ability. With Giant increasing our melee range, we should be able to hit even more creatures with this. And then for our second domain card, we're going to be going with Not Good Enough. This lets us reroll 1s and 2s on our damage dice. And then on to level 2, we'll get our 2 level up options. We're going to take increased traits to boost our agility, and then whatever else you'd like. And then we're going to increase our proficiency as well. Both of those are mainly to increase our weapon damage. And then for the domain card at level 2, I would go with Reckless or Strategic Approach. Since we can use one roll for multiple attacks with Whirlwind, advantage is a very good thing to have. I prefer Reckless since you'll likely be able to use it more often, but Strategic Approach has some other uses than just granting advantage, and it doesn't require you to spend stress, so it could be a good pick in terms of utility and survivability if you're willing to put a lot of points into knowledge. And then on to level 3, for our 2 level up options, we're going to be going with a +1 to evasion and an additional stress slot. For our domain card, we're going to go with Versatile Fighter. This lets us take a stress to make one of our damage dice deal maximum damage. We can get a lot more mileage out of this with Whirlwind since the same roll will be used against multiple creatures. And then lastly on to level 4, for our 2 level up options, we're going to take an additional hit point slot and we're going to increase our major threshold. For our domain card, we're going to go with Boost. I think this is definitely one of the coolest domain cards I've seen so far. We're able to mark a stress to get thrown into melee by one of our allies and make an attack. That attack has advantage and it deals additional damage as well. And that's it for the builds. Like I said, if this does well, I'll consider doing a part 2 with 3 more. If that's something you'd like to see, let me know down in the comments and let me know one of the classes you'd like to see as well. But hopefully you guys found the builds interesting or helpful, and hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next one.